Thank you everyone for giving us a few minutes to let people join. And thank you for your interest in To Protect, Serve, and Understand, a one-of-a-kind program also known as TPSU that uses theater to build empathy among communities and police officers. Although we will be showing you portions of performances tonight, I just want to make sure you know this is a director's chair discussion of the creative transformative work of the Irondale Ensemble project, which is a 38-year-old theater. Sorry, I have to mute myself on another screen. It is a 38-year-old theater company in Fort Greene with roots, members, and supporters throughout the US. We are streaming from Brooklyn, New York, the ancestral land and territory of the Lenape Nation. Please consider the legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement here. Thank you. So who am I? My name is Barbara Chen, and I am a consultant to TPSU. I worked with the New York City Police from 2006 until 2014. And last year, I was introduced to TPSU's creator, Irondale co-founder, Terry Greiss. And I've had the pleasure ever since of getting to know this program and the committed and talented artist facilitators you will soon meet. So our aim tonight is to share with you some of the backstage developments and the ongoing determination of TPSU and of the power of theater. And we will answer some frequently asked questions about how it started, its structure, and its future. But to get us started, let's take a look at our first video.
Stop.
We live in a time of increased tension
between police officers
and civilians.
We are not listening.
We are not being heard.
Often both sides
are misunderstood.
We need solutions.
We need empathy. We need to understand.
Hi.
We are proud members of
Irondale Theater Companies.
To Protect, Serve,
and Understand.
To Protect, Serve, and Understand
is a community program
that uses theater and improvisation
to build communication and empathy
between officers and the communities they serve.
7 officers and 7 civilians
spend one evening a week together,
improvising together. This leads to breaking bread and having conversations about topics we rarely get to hear the other's point of view on.
Topics we need to talk about but never do.
After dinner, no matter how heated things may get,
the table is cleared and we jump into the work.
The work consists of scenarios that force us to be playful, truthful, and vulnerable.
5 years, 128 alumni, dozens of precincts, thousands of New Yorkers engaged. We are To Protect, Serve, and Understand.
Joining us now are TPSU's founding members and workshop facilitators. Let me introduce artist facilitator Rivka Rivera. Rivka is originally from Brooklyn and East Harlem, and in addition to TPSU, she co-produced Irondale's On Women Festival, and she teaches with its STEM to STEAM program for youth. She is an actor, director, and filmmaker. And artist facilitator and music director Michael David Gordon was born and raised in Bed-Stuy and also lives in Brooklyn. He's a professional singer, songwriter, voiceover artist, and actor, and among many projects, co-directs the Irondale's Young Company Teen Acting Ensemble. He's also taught improv acting and other Irondale workshops at Rikers Island. And the creator of TPSU and Irondale Executive Director Terry Greiss. Terry is a lifelong New Yorker originally from the Bronx who also lives in Brooklyn. He is an actor who co-founded Irondale Ensemble with Jim Neeson and Barbara Mackenzie Wood almost 40 years ago. And we want to also recognize one of TPSU's early advisors, Lucy Winner, who couldn't be here tonight, but is always with us. So let's jump in to TPSU's beginnings. As you've heard, TPSU is one of many programs created and offered by Irondale, which just celebrated its 38th year. Terry, could you tell everyone briefly what Irondale does? Because it's great theater, but it's much more than that.
Really, Irondale exists to be an ongoing inquiry into what theater is. How does it get made? Who is it good for? And just this long-term picking apart of the art form and the craft with a permanent ensemble or a group of people who you work with on a daily basis.
So if you didn't already know, this is the backstory to TPSU. Terry wrote a letter to the NYPD after watching repeated news coverage of the Eric Garner case. And in 2015, the department formally agreed to letting Terry and Irondale develop some kind of program involving its officers. So could you tell us what happened next? I mean, how did this idea to introduce improvisational acting to police evolve into what it is today?
Well, after we got the call from One Police Plaza, which I was sure was a joke call because I had just sent the letter 2 days before, we met with Deputy Commissioner Susan Herman at the Division of Collaborative Policing. And we came in with all our credentials and ready to do a whole dog and pony show. And Susan got it like that. She understood how improvisation could really be helpful. So she said, let's create a pilot program. So we had several models that we were going to create. We knew basically what we were going to do. We knew that the way we work using improvisational theater games as a basic vocabulary was good for so many different kinds of people. We tested it over the years with school teachers and kids and people in prison and in just many situations. So we knew the methodology we were going to use. So it was really what menu were we going to put together? Were we going to do a cops and youth menu? Were we going to create an improv team of police and civilians? Or were we going to really go in depth and figure out how do we use improv to really deepen the conversation? And we knew that was going to take time. It couldn't be done in a workshop or a 2-day workshop or anything like that. And we posited the idea of 10 weeks, which we knew was a big ask for the department. We were going to take police officers off patrol or off their regular duties 1 night a week for 4 hours for 10 weeks. And they said yes. Again, I have to say I was shocked that they came that far. So the idea then was to people together who would never be in the same room together willingly, in the same room together, past experience, and say, okay, you're here. What do you want to talk about? We know what the situation is out there on the street. And here's the method we're going to teach you. We're going to give you the vocabulary with which to handle the conversation. And that's what we did.
And it really is so much more than, there is literal vocabulary, but there's technique and there's interpersonal communication skills and listening skills. And I think you and the audience will be able to see some of that very shortly in these parts of performances, which are the culmination of multi-week workshops. But something that I think we should address, which we all have thoughtfully strived to make very clear, and that's Irondale's programmatic independence. We intentionally state it before performances, and we should here as well. And so Rivka, can you elaborate on what that is and why it's important to recognize?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here talking about this. And it's just always amazing to hear, Terry, to hear you talk about how this all started. I came on board for round 2, so I wasn't there for the first round, but I've been there from round 2 to round 8. And to this question of our creative autonomy, which is really important. I think it's always important for me to note and to recognize and remember that we as facilitators and everyone who works on this program, like, we come from such a broad spectrum of political beliefs. Our beliefs about policing are totally broad. I'm personally more of an abolitionist, where we have reformists, and Michael David's smiling because it's one of the most important things about how this project comes together, is that spectrum. And what people often ask is, well, how much do you, or ask me is, what our relationship, what does it mean to be working with the NYPD? And certainly, I'm sure our audience will appreciate that's a, that question. I think especially after this summer is something that people are very much, well, are you working? What is your working relationship? And so the NYPD in that sense, they give us access to their officers, as Terry mentioned, which is amazing that these officers are on duty, but then they're coming and they're spending their evenings with us. So the NYPD supports that, which we couldn't do this work without them in that sense. And they also cover a nominal portion of our operational costs, but the majority of our funding comes from grants, and it comes from supporters like the people who are watching us today and supporters of Irondale. And it's really amazing to see how supporters come out for this work. But that means that really our creative work, and we say this before our performances, it's a reflection of us, the people in the room making that theater together, and we're not getting direction from any outside source, which is just a question that comes often, because when you're doing this work, and we'll talk about this more in depth later on, I think it can feel, what are you trying to say? What are you trying to say? And it's so much deeper and more nuanced and more complex than trying to speak to one perspective, or there's no political agenda in that sense, that this is the work we create is creatively autonomous and reflective of each workshop. So each performance is very, very different and very, very nuanced.
Thank you, Rivka. And this is a perfect segue to the question of who gets to participate. So maybe you all could talk a little bit about who's eligible. How do you ensure you're including and elevating all experiences and perspectives, and how do officers become involved? How are they, and how are the other players chosen?
Sure. Let's take the officers first. Again, as Rivka said, and as Terry said, the NYPD's input in this is invaluable. They really do give us access to their officers. And I can remember when we first met with them, and they said that they would do this. I was like, will they give us access to sort of the, media worthy people that, they want us to see? But no, they've given us access to whomever. And there are officers that have walked through that door that right away have said, in no uncertain terms out loud, I think this is bullshit, but here I am, and let's see what happens. In some cases, one of the phrases that one of the officers created was, sometimes they're voluntold. Sometimes officers are assigned there because they've gotten, write-ups and problems in their work. Some officers indeed come from community relations, so they come from all over the place. And, my dream around that is to get more of the higher ups, including the commissioner. My dream is to have the commissioner himself do this workshop. I think that would be incredible. In terms of civilians, we try to throw our net far and wide. There are always, we've noticed that there are voices that sometimes aren't in the room that really need to be in the room. Younger people of color, LGBTQ people, and as much as possible, we try to reach out to those communities, putting ourselves in those communities. We've been somewhat successful. We need to do more, and we know that, but that's where it's at. We want to get as many voices from, the 16-year-old who may be in the young company with Irondale, all the way up to, my 84-year-old neighbor who absolutely wants to do the program because she saw the last webinar that we did. It's all over the place.
If I could add on to that, now that we've done 8 series of these workshops, 8 performances, we have enough of a community audience where people are coming to see a performance and saying, I don't know what they're doing up there, but I think I want to be part of it, or my voice is not being heard, so I'm going to sign up and make my voice heard in the next round, which is a great way bringing those other voices to the table.
Or I
Either people who
disagree
are
with that.
fascinated
Yeah.
by what they're doing, or they totally disagree with it, but they are brave enough, and it takes a great deal of bravery, I think, to do this program. They're brave enough to want to put themselves in the mix and say, I want my voice heard.
And just to piggyback on that, Terry, they're also brave enough to stay in the room when things get hard and when things get hairy, and they really do. Every round, there's always a moment, 2, 3, 4, where we're not quite sure that the whole thing isn't going to blow up and people aren't going to run out of the room and not return, but they always do.
I did want to add,
go ahead, Rivka.
Just for anyone wondering as well, because I think this is pretty, I think actually the interview process is pretty interesting in the sense that we do see a lot of people, and the interviews, you know, so what it looks like, just so you know, it's us, the facilitators, and we've done the police officers, we've interviewed them at precincts or at the theater. It's different times, and we usually ask just questions, you know, about basic questions to get to know the person, about background, but then we really dive into the issues just to hear what people's perspectives are. What do you think about police and civilians relations? How do you feel about police brutality? How do you feel about media? And so we do start to get a sense. And so when we put together an ensemble, we already know a little bit about all the, and we try to make all, you know, to get as diverse a group in that room. And if we don't use someone for necessarily that round, we often find a way to utilize the people who are interested. If it's, and we'll talk about later, we do the interviews, we have our police officers and community members will interview someone at a point in the show, which we're going to talk about in depth. So that's a way people can get involved, and then we get them to come back. So it's really great.
You know what my favorite interview, I'm sorry, Barbara.
That's okay.
My favorite interview question. When was the last time you had your mind changed?
Yeah.
And what we're looking for with that, of course, is somebody who may be very opinionated, may have really strong ideas about what is right and what is wrong and what's going on, what's not going on, but they're open-minded enough to allow themselves to be affected by what happens, and they can change their mind. That's the perfect candidate.
It's also a great question to ask if you go on a first date. I'm not kidding.
Depends on whether you want a second.
Well, yes, exactly. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, hey.
Well, and a lot of this, though, I think what struck me right away is that this, unlike many community relations efforts, and there are some worthwhile and well-known efforts out there, but this TPSU is a prolonged exposure to a range of attitudes, and there's a sustained effort. And the very format of the workshop is this: it requires a mutual investment, like it or not. And a big part of that is the communal meal that, Terry, you talked about in the clip, breaking bread. And we heard someone say that, you know, after the table is cleared, no matter what was said, everybody gets to work. So could you all talk about what's happening at that dinner? You know, as you're eating, why is that an intentional part of the workshop? It's not just about feeding people.
When the department said, yes, go ahead and start, I really got scared. I was so nervous that this was going to be the biggest flop of anything I've ever done in my life. And I'm thinking about that moment of what happens when they all come in the room together. What do? And I thought, food. Food. Because even if they've got nothing to say to each other, if they're sitting around a table and they're munching on something, it gets over the first awkwardness. And maybe it'll take a couple of meals before you're really talking to each other. But the residual effect of that was this sensibility that we all have of the family Thanksgiving dinner. You know, for some of us, it's very positive. For some of it's very negative, but it's very resonant for a lot of us, or the family meal or whatever it is. And that automatically starts to open people up to talk about themselves or to ask questions of each other. Hey, how did you come here? Simple as that. And from that, we're able to start to shape the conversation and drop in a little bombshell here, which gets the discussion going even further. And for me, it's an essential part of these workshops.
I just thought of something that my dear grandmama Marie used to say, rest her soul. I always bring her up because she's always with me. But I remember, and I haven't thought about this in 30 years. She used to say, and I'm not paraphrasing, she used to say, ain't nobody can be mad at nobody if you got some mac and cheese inside you from me. And it's true. I found that to be true, that, when you sit down with somebody at a table and you enjoy food together, it opens you up and it connects you in a way, whether you want to or not. If not over nothing else, over this is some really good mac and cheese up in here.
And the thing too that I love though is again like how intentional this is as part of the workshop. So you're breaking bread, you're breaking down barriers, and yes, there's good conversation, but it really is about more than that. The work that you all have done allows almost anyone to develop some important skills, but that work is always rooted in theater. And I just wonder, Rivka, if you could tell us what that means, that this work is grounded in theater, and with some examples.
Absolutely. So in describing this, sometimes people can say, well, is this therapy? Is this counseling? And the biggest difference is, while it's therapeutic, while we certainly are learning communication skills, and those are all beautiful effects and consequences of this work, no, ultimately it's theater, and we all come to it as theater practitioners, Terry, Michael, David, and myself. Them definitely more expert than me, and I've learned so much working with them, but we all come to this with that background, and that is so, and I think it's important, you really need that background in order to facilitate this work, because everything we do is using improv work, using sometimes scripted work, using an interview as a monologue work, which we'll get into, as the perspective, as the way in to question beliefs, to question systems, to look at structures. But it has to be theater, because when we're entering into our own minds, into our own beings in that way, which for most of our participants is often the first time, you're experiencing your own thoughts and your own beliefs in a completely different way that I think only theater can offer, and only the structure of theater can offer. It's an offering of a reflection, and most importantly, that the work we're doing, we always know is headed towards a performance. So they know that there's going to be a performance at the end, that this is also about diving deep into ourselves, using these improv games to pull out and in some ways offer something to an audience that's going to come and see this sort of messy, collaborative group of images and stories and song that is representative of this group that's come together in this theatrical collage, and that's going to mean something, but that the performance is what we're headed towards. And it's really amazing to see what happens to this group as they build an ensemble, and what you have to learn about trust when you're working with other, all of a sudden this person who's, a stranger that I've met, but is, okay, that's a police officer, that's a civilian, okay, who are these people? You start to get to know them, but then suddenly there's a point where you're like, you're no longer any of those things. The day of the show, you're my ensemble member, and that's the most important thing. Like, we all want to hit this note together, and working together in that way and doing such, what we ask of them, not only this, but because it's improv based, it's not like they know what the script is going to be until 1 or 2 days before. We're really guiding this ship, saying, trust us. And they're like, where's the script? We're like, trust us, there's no script until like the day before, but we'll put it all together. And when I first came into this, I was like, okay, Terry, Michael, David, this is a little crazy. And it worked, and it's worked over and over again, but there's so much trust involved. And every time these participants get up and are able to share so courageously and bravely, but I also think that's because there's a built-in structure. So after we have our meal, we get up and we start playing improv games, theater games. And this is an arsenal of games that Irondale has been using over these 38 years. So what's amazing is that a lot of these games are the same games used in the ensemble work with Jim Neeson when he's directing a show, that are used in our STEAM, our science, when we work with science students, we're bringing them improv work for communication. These exercises, and they're built from, we have Augusto Boal exercises, Fullen exercises, Irondale created exercises. And so they're games that, at first, I think, all of a sudden you might be having a really heated conversation about gun control or about an article we just read about police brutality. And you're really, really, your body's tensed and you're at the table, and then midway through, you're like trying to get your point across. And Terry's like, okay, we're going to play this game called You Stink. And we're all going to stand in a circle and tell each other we stink. And it's
what did we talk about? Sorry, Rivka.
No,
But for example, mirror and some of the things that maybe those of you who have watched the Zoomcast have seen a little bit of, but maybe we could break down how those help build that trust.
Mirror, I think, is, for me, that's the most important exercise we do. I mean, and there are many of them. There are many exercises that are important, but mirror is sort of at the heart of everything. And it's simply two people creating the image or the illusion of a mirror together. And one person starts to lead and another person starts to follow or reflect. And then we find out you can't really reflect, especially if I'm doing this, you can't really reflect. So what do I have to do in order to make you look good? And that means I've got to slow down. Now, how does this extrapolate to me coming in a fraught situation, and I've got something really important to tell you, and if I tell it to you, will you really hear it? I have to be able to stay with my partner, stay with that person long enough to say, is the message I'm sending, which it could be as simple as this, is the message I'm sending the one that's being received? It is, but it's not exactly. From the point of the receiver, it's, oh, I missed that last move. Do I go back for it? Or do I stay in the present and get what I can get? And when you take these basic tenets of making this simple, seemingly simple exercise work, it has great ramifications for the way we communicate as human beings. We take that and we put that into a conversation exercise called Repeat What I Say. And again, this is an exercise where you must be very present, because most of the time when we talk to each other, as soon as Rivka starts to talk, I start to formulate my answer. So if she's got any kind of nuanced complexity, and Rivka always has nuanced complexity.
Always.
If there's a bend in her thought, and I'm busy in, my mind in Cleveland here, thinking that, I know what I'm going to say to the first three words she said, I can't possibly have gotten her message. But in Repeat What I Say, I have to take her idea, repeat it in my own words to her satisfaction, and then I can add my part to the conversation, my original thought based on that. So you can see the relationship between these two exercises, and everything we do is really scaffolded in this way. How deep can we get the conversation to go? How much can we be present with our partner? How do we make the other person look good? Well, you do this for 10 weeks, and all of a sudden you're creating some heavy-duty bonding, because I'm with a group of people who are seriously trying to grapple with this idea of how do I communicate things that are very, very important to me. And I've done it by starting this way. Just looking at somebody in a way I've never looked at them before and moving very simply.
Yeah.
We promised to show some portions of performances, and they're so powerful. And I wonder if we could talk, because before we go to our second video, which is a representation of something called What Do You See? Is that right?
Yeah. So what you see is a Boal game, an Augusta Boal game that we use that really helps us get into this discussion of implicit bias. It's about looking at a structure objectively, or rather how difficult it is to do that. And this exercise shows us that we're always putting story with what we see. So we took that work and we used in one of our rounds, we used the text from the Sandra Bland traffic stop, and we had our actors utilize that text and play around with that exercise. So let's go to that clip right now.
Okay.
All right, let's do this. 2547 country. Get out. Yeah, we're gonna do it.
Hey, yeah, don't touch me.
Get out of the car.
Don't touch me.
Get out of the car.
I'm under arrest. You don't even have the right to touch me.
2547 country, FM 1098, just 14. Send me another unit. Out of the car.
You just opened my
Get
door.
out of the car.
Wait, you gonna stun me?
I will light you up. Get out of the car.
You gonna stun me?
I will light you up.
Get out of the car.
What are you gonna stun me?
I will light you up. Get out of the car.
What are you gonna stun me?
I will light you up. Get out of the car. I will light you up.
You gonna stun me?
Get out of the car. I will light you up.
Stun me?
Get out of the car. I will light you up.
You gonna stun me?
Get out of the car.
You gonna stun me?
I will light you up. Get out of the car. Get out of the car.
You gonna stun me?
I will light you up.
You gonna stun me?
Get out of the car.
You gonna stun me?
I will light you up. Get out of the car.
You gonna stun me?
I will light you up. Get out. Get out of the car.
You gonna stun me?
I will light you up. Get out of the car.
You gonna stun me?
I will light you
You
up.
gonna stun me?
Get out of the car.
And then you gonna stun me?
Get out of the car.
Then you gonna stun me? I will light you up. And then you gonna stun me? Get out of the car.
Get out of the car.
Then you gonna stun me?
I will light you up. Get out of the car.
And then you gonna stun me?
I will light you up. Get out of the car.
And then you gonna stun me?
Light you up. Get out of the car.
And then you gonna stun me?
I will light you up.
And then you gonna stun me?
Get out of the car. I will light you up. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, so that was a clip from that show, and it was a bit of a longer clip, but what we would ask you as audience to unpack, if we could hear you live right now, would be what were the different pictures that you were seeing. So it was the same text, the same positioning, switching out quite rapidly, all of our participants, and what are the different stories that are being told when those power dynamics switch? What is the change of gender, skin color, what someone's wearing? How does that transfer in our head so rapidly what we're seeing? And so that was a theatrical way for us to explore implicit bias. And it led to quite a deep conversation, both in the workshop and also at our talk back after that particular show.
Another way that you guys really get into these deep conversations is quite intimate, and that is through interviews. And Michael David, can you talk about the use of interviews and then the product that comes out of that?
Sure. At a certain point during the 10-week workshop, we ask the officers to interview a civilian that they don't know, and we match them up, we find them, and to interview them about their experiences of interaction with law enforcement. And we ask the civilians to do the opposite, to interview an officer. And, we set all of the interviews up, and then they do the interview, record them audio or via video, and then they create a monologue and come back, and using only the words of the person that you're interviewed, their job is to bring them to the stage, which is the way I like to put it. So it's not an impersonation of the person, but they're bringing the person's essence, the person's words, the person's thoughts, and the person's point of view and worldview to the stage to be seen and considered. And through that, what we have found is that the person doing the interview is able to see the world through a different lens than the one that they walk around with all day long. If I'm a 50-year-old cop that has been on the job for 25 years. What is it like to see the world through a 17-year-old Puerto Rican kid living on the Lower East Side in dealing with people like me? And it's revelatory.
We just did that in our most recent Zoomcast, which you can watch on Irondale's YouTube channel. It's the spring Zoomcast, but we are going to show you a staged performance of some of these monologues, and that's in our third video.
It is hot. It is sweaty. And I look up and his dick juice is dropping in my face. Ew. And so, and there's like 15 feet between me and the last officer, and they're gonna drop him right, and I'm like, okay, I'm okay. And so they just drop this naked dude on me, and I catch him, and we both fall back. Well, the adrenaline was so high that I didn't even realize that I had hurt myself. But after some time had passed, I went to stand up. I had torn my meniscus. And you know what? Every time it rains, I still feel it.
Hi, my name is Amanda. Question I was asked is, can I be anti or polka? Which one would I be? Well, I can be both. Since my dad was a police officer in New Jersey, and his dad, my grandfather, was chief of police, and he's a legacy, I'm polka. But I'm anti-cop because of my experience. When I was 17 and just 17 years old, I just got my license. Just 1 week. And I was driving with my friends in New York. Harlem. I had just dropped off my friends, and I had this guy in my car, my friend's boyfriend. I had just passed the red light. I was picking out in New York. I got pulled over. Common sense, I passed the red light, I get pulled over. Police officer comes to my window. And he asks for my driver's license. He takes his flashlight. And he focuses on my mini skirt. Takes the light and just points it on my mini skirt. Goes back, walks back to the police car. And I'm sorry. Goes back to the car, has me come out of the car. And the reason why I'm so terrified is because the guy in the back seat told me he had drugs on him. And I didn't know. He was my friend's boyfriend. I didn't know. So now I'm in front of the officer, and he puts the spotlight on the police car. And he focuses it on me, on my mini skirt. On my mini skirt. And he comes to me and he tells me, I won't give you a ticket if you give me your phone number. So now I'm terrified, because now I know that this guy in my car that I don't know has drugs on him. I can't do anything. I have to do what I have to do not to get in trouble. I gave him my number. He had me stand there while he called my number to make sure I gave him the right number. I'm terrified. I could have reported. I didn't know how to, but I had his number. Hallelujah. 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 I could have recorded. I didn't know how to, but I had his number.
There's so much in that, and it just is incredibly moving, even seeing it multiple times. We just watched police officer Diana Torres. She is in the 84th precinct in Brooklyn Metro Tech. And before we move to music, which we also just heard, Michael David, I think this is really relevant. Deanna just participated at interviewing a civilian, and that was another example of this transformative work. Can you speak a little bit to the difference that interview made with your mentee?
Sure. There was a young gentleman that I had actually started teaching back when he was 14 years old, and he's now 28. He's a young Puerto Rican man living on the Lower East Side. And this also speaks to the recruiting question. Sometimes it takes years to recruit somebody for this program. I had been working on Justin since round 2 of this project, and we just got him for this last webinar because he was terrified of police and he hated police. And he said, I cannot be in the same room with a cop, these oppressors, these, invaders. And those are words that he used. But I kept making him the offer, which is one of those basic precincts of what Irondale is and what good improvisational acting is, which is keep making the offer to the person. And he finally decided to be an interviewee. And he said, who was this person? And I said, trust me, you're going to connect. So he was interviewed by Deanna Torres, the woman that you saw in the video just now, and they instantly connected. They were supposed to interview for an hour. They ended up talking for 2.5 hours. Deanna has a son basically the same age as Justin. Deanna is also Puerto Rican. She's a mom. Justin said, oh my God, you remind me of my mother, as soon as he got on the camera with her. And that's the power of some of this work, is they were able to be in the same space, even though the space was a Zoom space. They were able to be in the same space as officer and as civilian, but also as brother, as mother, as son, etc., and hear each other's stories and see each other in a new way. Now you can't get them to shut up. They're talking to each other and calling each other and texting each other all the time.
And I just wanted to jump in and say one of the things that, and rewatching Deanna giving Amanda's monologue interview story, just one of the most powerful things about this interview that I hear reflected back often is there are moments where people go through this and say, wow, I'm seeing something from a, you're seeing something from a new perspective, when you're actually really saying, okay, I accept what I've been asked to do, which is to become this person. And we've seen time and time again, these people who are not actors, but really are actors, take on this work as professional actors and do an amazing job of that experience. And some of what can happen from that is then they come back to their own role and their own selves, and they've all of a sudden had that other view. And it's not necessarily that they'll change their mind or there's something massively dramatic. That certainly can happen. But I think what our work does, more than some big overwhelming change, is that these little moments where you get the opportunity to think critically, which is not something that our society allows for often, and is so important for us to be able to have the freedom to think critically about the systems that we're entrapped in, about the roles that we give to other people. And I think that's what this work does. And that's why theater as well, is that it gives people the freedom and the opportunity that they've never had in their everyday life.
If you really want to put it in theatrical terms, we're rehearsing the skills that they need to go out and deal as real people. So that's what the rehearsal room is about. And it's a place where you can fall flat on your face and make huge mistakes. But those mistakes are automatically forgiven because it's happening in a theater, in that rehearsal room. And then you hone your craft, you hone your listening skills, you hone your communication skills, and you go out and you do it on patrol or at the job or wherever you've got to use these.
We also saw at the end of that clip some singing. And I just, wonder, Michael David, can you tell us, why do you sing?
That's a great question. We sing because singing connects us. It connects us to ourselves in terms of our deeper selves, in terms of things that we can't necessarily articulate with words. Uh, Singing and music connects us to other people, to the world. Um, uh, there's a singing, I've seen singing bring groups of people together that you would consider impossible. Again, not just this project, but Crips and Bloods. I've seen it. I've seen Crips and Bloods in a room packing, by the way. They didn't know that some of the others were there. And they're about to go to war until the band starts to play the Beatles' Hey Jude, literally. And they all start singing da 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 side by side. That's a real story. I was there. And those that's the power of what music does. It doesn't make those divisions that we're wrestling with go away, but it it hits us in another part of our beings, of our minds, of our souls, where there's a communal connection that we all have, whether it's somebody in Zimbabwe or somebody here in Bed-Stuy. Um, Very often they can still connect over a Temptations tune.
So there's
I have to say,
levity.
Michael David is expert at getting non-singers to sing. I mean, he really is terrific at that. And we had it happen in one of the workshops where there, in a repeat what I say exercise, there were two people, a police officer and a civilian, both female, who were at each other's throats. I mean, they were ready to kill each other.
Yeah.
One of them said, "You're the only person in this room I'm afraid of is because I think you're going to kill me." And just at that moment when it was either going to end up in blows or somebody was going to end up crying and walking out of the room, I said, "Okay, let's sing." And these two women standing next to each other in a circle started singing, "I like the flowers, I like the daffodils." And all of a sudden, all that stuff, it's not forgotten, but it's put aside for now. And it comes back, but it's put aside so we can sing together as human beings.
And there's another level of humanity that gets brought into the room when people lift their voices in song.
And I would love to show a clip that we have of this levity and the utility and creativity. Can we please see the fourth video? Yes, come together. And that is just a small taste. And you may have heard that some of those lyrics were not the actual song. Michael David, talk about that
Yes.
exercise too.
Having people use the verse structure of a song, in this case, speaking of the Beatles, Come Together, which is aptly named, of course, but having a person write their own personal lyrics and replacing the normal original verses with their own personal lyrics, speaking about this experience that they're going through and what it means to relate to somebody that they may not have related to, or writing lyrics through the perspective of the other, which that last gentleman that you heard singing, he was writing from the perspective of a young Black man. And he is a, 30-year-old plus Hispanic man who's been on the force for 8 years. So, some of the, as he put it to me one time, during the break, damn, man, I'm writing about somebody that is a perp, but I'm writing through his eyes. And that's the stepping into the shoes of quote unquote the other, and what that does in terms of broadening your perspective. Again, as Rivka said, it's not about agreement. It's about understanding and seeing and hearing that story and acknowledging that that story is true, it's real, even if I don't understand it.
I just want to recognize that we're approaching the top of the hour, and we definitely want to discuss the future and take some questions. So let me move us now to a very important pause that the facilitation team took this summer. And I want to ask you to discuss your personal feelings, reactions, even concerns about TPSU that you felt, as we saw last May, the brutal mistreatment and what has now been acknowledged as the murder manslaughter of George Floyd, and the protests that shook the country and were vividly on display here in New York. So could you each speak to that?
Certainly. I'll start.
Yeah, go ahead. Okay.
Thanks.
And there was so much happening. It was that compacted one on top of the other, the revelation that this pandemic was happening and we would not be in the space. So trying to figure out what were we going to do with our work and how would it continue? And then this murder and the tragedy that followed, and then the outcries in the streets. And we were trying to process all of that. And I think we had also, right before that, we had also been yearning for, I think, a chance for the facilitators. We do this work twice a year. And so we really wanted, I think we really were seeking an opportunity to just pause for ourselves to say, can we look at and use some of this like critical thinking and just take a step back and look at like all of the incredible work we've done. We've done 8 rounds at this point, and really just look at that. And then I think for us, I know for me, I'll speak for myself personally, the conflict being, there was a question of, what we were meant to do in that moment. And I think for me, I felt very strongly that that was a moment for us to step back and do some of the deep listening work that we teach in our workshops, that this was a moment in time where we really needed to stop and listen to the voices of people who've been through our program, to listen to the protests, listen to the protesters, listen to the perspectives of our officers, but especially I think the protesters, there was this tension of, do we step in now and say like, our work is here and people need this, and certainly they do. And I felt very strongly that it was actually a time for us to that was a moment for the protesters. And so we took that time to really, we were all meeting online, the 3 of us talking through very specifically the work we've done. Because we don't always have the time to, I guess, it's so often on its feet and right before. So we didn't really have that time to say, here's what I've been thinking, and I'm conflicted on this exercise. I'm conflicted on how we're structuring this, because like I said, we all come from such different political backgrounds, and we're trying to structure a performance that really allows for all of those complexities to thrive and all of the nuance to thrive. And that's difficult at times, to create something where you're not pushing forward a story. And so it was really important for us to be able to look at that critically and have those conversations amongst each other. And I was really grateful that the trust we've built allowed us to have tough conversations. You know, I'll say, being a younger woman in this collective, sometimes I think in other spaces I've been, it's really hard to speak out when you feel like, I don't know if I'm comfortable with this structure of this, or what this is saying, or the story this is telling. And with Terry and Michael David, I'm really grateful that there would be times where I was even saying like, I really don't think we should have this talk to the press right now. You know, I really don't think we should do this. And I felt really grateful to be heard and have a space where we could have the kind of difficult conversations that we're asking our participants to have all the time. And that was really important that we ask ourselves to do that.
Absolutely. And you did hear, sorry, Michael David, go ahead.
Lucy Winner, who we mentioned earlier, was really very important in that process as well, in giving us sort of what I like to call helping to build a container where we could have those hard conversations. She's just a real pro at knowing how to do that. And Rivka and I especially, you know, what I love about our relationship is that we come from two very different places around law enforcement, and we're able to go at each other and argue and fight and, you know, agree and disagree and apologize. Yep, I was just getting to that. You know, one time, I'm not going to go into it, but over the summer I said something and I immediately knew that what I was saying was bullshit. It's like, why did you go there? That was not cool. And I was able to call her up and say, you know what, Rivka, I'm really sorry. That was a drag. That was wrong. And she was able to hear it. And that was a huge example to me of what we as a group of people, as a collective, had built together. Rivka and Terry and Lucy and myself and you, Barbara, as well.
You know, at the same time that we were deep diving, we were getting a lot of requests to do something with the program.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of those requests were coming from alumni. What do we do now? When the George Floyd tragedy happened, my inbox was full of alumni. Can we talk? Can we get together? And so we opened up a Zoom room for 3 nights, and we just said, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, if you want to come in, if you feel like you want to just sit there and look at each other's faces for 3 hours, we can do that. If you've got something to say, people will hear it. And even though you're not from the same cohort necessarily, you've all been through this process. And it was staggering, the kinds of things, you know, that we heard that night, or those several nights. You know, cops who were on the job, you know, in the midst of the protests and were terrified of what might happen to them physically, called in with their cell phones to talk about that. Civilian alumni who were so angry that they almost had to reevaluate whether sitting down with police, which is something they did months ago through this program, would they ever do that again? You know, they were so upset. And yet, just the idea that this was a place to come where they could air these ideas and thoughts, that became important. And from that, and I was a big believer in, you've got to get people in the same room together. You know, that was really important. That I didn't see how this digital world could serve us in any way. Because I said, we're not eating together, we're not breathing the same air, we're not sweating together. And yet, we discovered together, starting with that first night, that this is a different kind of room. But we can be together, and we can really make headway together here in this, what seems like a very isolating sometimes medium, but it doesn't have to be. It depends on how it's used. So as we look forward to the future of this project, I think the live space is going to be important, but this virtual space is going to be equally as important.
Yeah, we hadn't quite figured out, you know, how to work on, you know, the lack of hugging and, you know, virtually how to make that happen, but we're working on that. So it's just to let you know.
And you did bring back alumni and have what we called Zoom casts, where you broadcast to hundreds of Irondale TPSU fans and others through the Zoom and YouTube. And we have a clip from, I think it may have been the first attempt to do this virtually. Can we please see video 5?
What I appreciated, because I really didn't want to do this. Like I said last week, I didn't want to do this. I mean, I was just angry and whatever. But with having experienced it even for the second time, there's so much opportunity for understanding and empathy when you have a chance to talk, interview, and just get behind somebody else's eyes who's doing a different job than you, a very important job, you know, in terms of our society. And just to get behind his eyes and to hear others, you know, getting behind the eyes of their counterparts is valuable. I don't know how we can have, you know, how the country can have more dialogue, authentic dialogue.
Else's eyes. I think that's just brilliant. Say hallelujah to getting behind someone else's eyes. That's just brilliant. And that's it. How do I get behind this person's eyes and see what they see?
So we are just a couple of minutes away from taking some questions. And before we move to that, I would love to also recognize that was Cynthia Grayman Pond. And I think she is a retired New York City public school principal. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to echo that it has been something to appreciate that you all have this willingness to not only host and facilitate, but also have these hard conversations among yourselves. And there's always, I have witnessed such a heartfelt balance and humor and 100% honesty. And, you know, we have had some more than a few tough conversations, always respectful and thoughtful. And we've addressed anti-racism and power dynamics and the optics of working with law enforcement, especially at a time when many people would prefer a wholesale dismantling of the police. And I would like to ask you each to just share what enables you to come back to this work and to believe in what TPSU can do.
You know, I don't have absolute confidence in a lot of things in my life. I have absolute rock solid confidence in this work. And I have actually for 38 years, from the moment that I first came upon it one spring night. There is a magic in this work and a power that's not about magic at all. It's a very real thing, but it's the fact that it helps us to see each other and to tell each other stories. It's just incredibly powerful, and I know it works. And that's why I keep coming back to it, no matter how bad things get out here. And in some ways, the worse they get, the more confidence I have in the work.
There is a need in human beings to make a connection, you know, and there are so many reasons why we don't connect. Most of them come from fear or manipulation of different forces that try to keep us apart for Machiavellian reasons. But when we can get past that and get down to, I'm a human being, what do I need right now? I need to make contact with somebody else. And that's what this work is about for me. And that's what keeps me going. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning.
Yeah, I'd say what's amazing is, I've had some of them, I feel like every round, maybe I feel more and more like conflicted at times, but even more, about the work. But it's that conflict and it's that paradox that I find always feels like the most honest thing I'm experiencing at that time. And it's always like achingly true, no matter what's happening. And that in whatever conversation and whatever, I love the word container that Michael David used, the container of this workshop, of these exercises, of the theatricality of it, always allows for that critical thinking that's so necessary, that when I'm not experiencing that, it can feel more lost, even though sometimes you can feel lost in the contradictions of your feelings and your thoughts and your emotion when you're head on dealing with these issues. And that's why I keep coming back.
And also, I just believe in people. I really do. At the end of the day, I believe in people.
It's also a lot of fun.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we definitely want to take some questions. We already have a couple. If you are out there watching on YouTube, I believe you can write your question into the comment thread, and it'll be fed to us. So let me share a question from Linda. She asks, have any of the cops said that it stayed with them after, if something came up for them in the course of their work?
Yeah,
Who wants to take it?
Several of them. One officer told me that, several have said, paraphrased this, that they listen to people on the street differently now. That they don't go in with a proscribed, this is what you got to do, but they listen to what's coming from the other person before they communicate back, I guess you'd say. One officer talked about using one of our exercises during one of the protests when he was being yelled at by a protester, and he was able to just listen underneath the rant, as it were, and not escalate, not overreact, which he said I might have done at another time. We're getting a lot of those. We get a lot of those.
We also I just wanted to make a point of that some of this work as well, even though I said it's theatrical, it's not therapy, there is the more and more we've gotten, and as we know, the rate of suicides for police officers has gone up and up, the rate of suicides all over, but the mental health issue here and what this work does to create a culture or begin building a culture where talking about how you're feeling, talking about what it's like to have the experiences that you have is okay and important and necessary is so profound. And I think that is one of the biggest things that I find alumni officers especially leave with, is that once they've had that experience of being able to talk about it and know that it's okay and it's important and it's helpful for them, they want to continue to talk about it. And so that's a really, really, really important thing that I think that this work starts to create and can have a ripple effect with.
A question from Tim. What kind of relationships are formed in these workshops? Are there any that surprise you?
Talk about Juan and John.
Juan and John. Yes, John is a police officer. Juan is a civilian. John is white. Juan is Hispanic. One night after one of the sessions, they got into a very intense conversation / argument. And John, the officer, twice said, I can't be here. I'm either going to beat your ass or I'm going to walk out of here. But again, and I attribute this to them and their bravery and the work, is that they both stayed in the room for that conversation that lasted, we ended it the session at 10, at 1:40 in the morning, they were still there talking with me. I was there. And I just thought that was amazing. And now when you ask one about the other, very often, because I'm in touch with them both, they will ask after the other person. And I just think that's incredible.
You know, they never came to agreement
Right.
about almost anything.
Right.
But they did come to a deeper understanding of who the other person was and where those opinions were coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that was the great success of that relationship.
In our last 10 minutes, I would like to ask who you would like to invite to the next workshop, and how people who are watching can help further this work.
I'd like to invite more young people, and I'm talking, 15, 16, early 20s, young people of color as well as, white people, because I think that one of the things that we've been looking for more are those younger voices, and especially young men of color who very often are reacted to in a certain way because of the fear of young men of color, like Justin, for instance. So they can become involved. All they need to do is contact us, and we would love to bring them in for an interview and get them involved in the program. If not in the actual 10-week program, possibly as interviewees. So there are a number of ways to be involved.
I would love to see an all-female version of this project.
Yeah.
Female officers and female civilians, because I think those stories will emerge in a different way than they can in a co-ed workshop, if you will. We hear things around the edges very often from women participants, both officers and civilians, that I think are really important to get out in the open. And I'd love to see that. I'd also love to see something with police officers and undocumented people. And I know there's a great deal of fear that would have to be overcome for somebody who's not documented, who's here, quote unquote, illegally, to put themselves in a room with a police officer. If we could figure out a way to make that happen, again, I think those relationships, those stories are important to hear.
And I would also like to see a session with just decision makers of the NYPD, from Commissioner, which I've back in the day when I was sitting one day having lunch with Commissioner O'Neill, I said that to him. I said, I would love to get you and major decision makers into a 10-week workshop. I think that would be incredible.
Yeah, I would love to see, we'll invite brothers and sisters from the transgendered community to join us. We've had that once before, and I think what it opens up in terms of conversation, especially for officers, especially knowing the kind of danger that our transgender community undergoes all the time, that there's something really critical about having the voices who are dealing with the systemic injustice so frequently, and that is a really important voice to have in the mix. And I'll also say, I just want to acknowledge that I recognize how just one of the conflicts, one of the nuances that we struggle with sometimes, and that actually I remember Tracy gave voice to in our last Zoomcast, who was one of our civilian members, is it's complex to ask people to share their stories, especially when it is the oppressed sharing with the oppressor. And so that can be really complex, and that I want to recognize that, just that we recognize that, and that this work, I believe, is not for everyone, and nor should it have to be, that it's not a demand on any party to join, and that it really does, I think, take a lot from a civilian, from everybody involved, but to share your story, that we don't want it to be something where we're making use of your story, that I think a lot of people feel that it's an opportunity to be heard.
What would you say to people who remain skeptical or just, have misgivings about the program? I wonder if maybe one or all of you could sort of say what you would say to someone who's like, I don't believe in it, or I don't trust it. Like, what would you say?
I don't think there's anything you can say except come and experience it. There's nothing, there are no words. I can't be eloquent enough to change your mind if that's the position you're starting from. But I do ask people especially people who are really strongly sure that this is all full of shit, that they come and they watch the program. They sit in the bleachers while a workshop is going on, or they come to a performance, or they put themselves in the hot spot and they enroll in the program. That's the only thing I have to say to them. We've gotten a lot, especially on Facebook and Twitter and and social media. We've gotten a lot of comments like that. Oh, this is all propaganda. And I try to, as respectfully as possible, to say, have you seen it? And they said, no, I would never see it. Well, I don't want the conversation to end there. You need some of that yes and improv principle of you're right and come experience it. I understand your point of view. Now come and experience it.
Yeah, I so agree. I think it's experiential, and that goes just again back to why it's theater. It's not a discourse. So, you have to experience it. You have to see it. You have to witness it. Ideally live, but maybe on Zoom.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I just want to know a couple of comments and questions, and then you can see how central race is in a lot of these questions. One is Irondale working with the Asian community? And then just a comment that it would be interesting to see an all-white civilian group and an all police officers of color group. I wonder do you have reactions to that?
My reaction is yes, absolutely. That would be excellent. Again, when you're trying to target a specific group and bring in and construct a certain type of workshop, there's a whole other level of balls that have to be juggled and dynamics that have to be traversed and permissions that have to be given and all kinds of things. But yes, absolutely. We would love that. That would be phenomenal. And that's a part of our, we have the small dreams and then we have the big dreams. And, some of those are just the big dreams as we move forward. I mean, my plan is to do this project for a long time, years. So, yes.
I hope so. And I think it's at a very critical period right now, well, especially in New York, but the whole country is talking about policing, but they're talking about the policies that have to change, which nobody denies, but then they wonder where a program like this fits in when you've got to work from here. And we are saying you also have to work from here. You have to work deep as well as work broad. And we're not the policymakers, We state repeatedly, Rivka said it, Michael David said it, we are theater artists. It's that is what we bring to make change. That's all we can do. We're not therapists, we're not conflict resolution specialists, we are theater artists. And that is the way you are invited into our space.
Yeah, I want to add just that, I said the critical thinking piece, which is so important, but the other most important skill that I think we do is we ask people to use their imagination. That's what we do as actors. We make pretend. We pretend to be doing things, and yet it's such an important skill, especially at this moment in time when I do believe as a society we're looking at, okay, if we were to tear down or if we were to restructure, what would that look like? And I think what we find in this work is actually how limited so much of our imagination has become by the idea of what we can't do. You know, we're really good at saying what we can't do. And yet when it comes to what can we do, there's a blank and a fear. And all of our improv games are about, okay, how do we move past that? How do we dream big, dream wild? And when we move that work to saying, okay, what would your idyllic, we tear down the system as it is, what would it look like? You know, that's really exciting to be doing with a group of civilians and officers. And I hope we can continue. That's what I hope to see, is that we can really get even more specific and dream big and see where that really starts to go as we ask people to use that creative imagination to think of a new structure outside, you know, outside of the oppressive realm that we're living in right now.
Imagination is, you know, a first cousin of vision. And I really do believe that. It's very important to be able to vision. And it takes a certain bravery to vision something. What does that mean? You can't have something created until you vision it first. And the other thing I want to say about these policy is made by people. They're not made by robots. They're not made up in heaven or whatever. They're created and agreed upon by people. And our part of our goal is to get to those people and to influence those people with our work, hopefully.
And I just want to add to that, Michael David, because one of the things that I come back to in interrogating the work and, you know, all of the different iterations and future editions of it, is that this program, TPSU, really leaves people with some practical skills. And you've heard them talked about, you know, better listening, interpersonal communication, and the way that that connects to this bigger question of policies and reform is that you can personally apply the things that you learn in this workshop, regardless of who is in charge and what the policies are, right? You personally apply the things that you learn and can model them for your colleagues, for, you know, others. And as we're coming up just in the final minutes of this, we want to thank everybody for having stuck with us. And I just want to read a comment from Judith, who says, as a civilian, I became best friends with one of the officers from this experience, which I think, you know, is a apt way to maybe close this conversation. And before we go, you know, it's been a good hour and a half, and we thank you again. Just want to ask you to please, if this meant something to you, to share it with friends. There will be the recording on YouTube. You can visit irondale.org for more of their work. And this particular discussion is a precursor to the 38th anniversary gala, which is on May 13th, and it honors choreographer and activist Bill T. Jones, and you can join for that. There are also details on the website. And then finally, if you want more information about To Protect, Serve, and Understand, or you want to become involved, please email tpsu@irondale.org.
Thank you, Barbara. You're awesome.
Thanks, Barbara. Yeah.
Yes,
Thank
all
you
shout
all.
outs to Barbara. You rule.
Yeah. We have
Thank you
many
so
more
much,
thoughts
Max.
we can continue to share another time.
And thank you, Max.
Thank you, Max.
Max. Thanks, folks.
Yes, let's close with video 7. Thank you.
For you, 'cause I too am free.
I say Black Lives Matter. You say law and order. We cry, say their names. You say you're not to blame. 2020 has us all on our knees. Got to get together, 'cause I can't breathe. Come together right now over me.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's pull up another poll.